All right, 7 minutes before the top of the hour. This is a Fox News alert. President Trump has just wrapped up a press event where he summarized his historic summit with that man right there, Kim Jong-un. Let's bring in former State Department senior advisor under President Trump and President Bush, Christian Whitten, joins us right now from our nation's capital. Well, Christian, what do you think of what we saw from the president just in the last hour?
You know, I think this is a big deal. But it's also the culmination of efforts that have taken place over the last year and a half, 2 years nearly, that have been fundamentally different with this administration than what the Clinton administration and Bush administrations did to try to denuclearize North Korea. You know, a couple of big differences. One is the maximum pressure campaign. You've talked about that somewhat, which began the earliest days of the Trump administration. Two, basically a shift in talk. So there's not a lot of talk about unifying the Korean Peninsula, but frankly more pressing issues like you know, the security of the United States,
right,
like protecting our mainland, and also about giving security assurances to North Korea so they realize this is actually going to be an improvement of their security rather than something that makes them weaker.
Christian, he said at the podium, he said, you know, I've done something that no other president could do, including President Obama and President Bush and other presidents in the past. He said, this is not a slight on Obama. This is all presidents. He said, this is what I do. It's the art of the deal. What did he do that got us to this point?
Well, one thing is that just willingness to engage personally, which is a high-risk, high-reward type approach. You know, previously you had these discussions between people who couldn't actually make decisions. You had it conducted, for example, by Condoleezza Rice and Chris Hill in the Bush administration, by Wendy Sherman in the Clinton administration, incidentally the same person who negotiated the disastrous deal, the Iran nuclear deal with Iran. Very different in the Trump administration, where you had the president putting his own skin in the game, because at the end of the day, the only two people who can fundamentally change the course North Korea is on, Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, and his willingness to do that made the difference.
How about 4 UN resolutions, 3 of which might have been unprecedented in the drastic consequences, and the legitimate military option that China and Russia thought we were willing to implement? That was put forward by Nikki Haley. How important?
Those were very important. That effort goes back a long way. Some of the earlier very important resolutions actually do date from the Bush administration and John Bolton when he was U.S. ambassador up there. But that unified allied front, and Nikki Haley was a fundamentally important part of that, where you have the United States working in unison with allies, and importantly Japan and South Korea. South Korea was switched in this process from a right-wing to a left-wing government.
Christian Whitten, thanks so much.
Thank you. We have Sean Hannity with his exclusive interview with the president at the top of the hour.
Yeah, don't move. Singapore Summit recap coming your way. Next 3 hours. All right, straight to a Fox News alert, and here we go. The handshake that will go down in history. Overnight, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un agreeing to, quote, complete denuclearization following meetings with President Trump in Singapore.
Yes, the two world leaders signing that document right there with the world watching. It happened around 1:45 a.m. Eastern Time. President Trump just moments ago wrapping up a news conference, and he says the summit is just beginning.
Our unprecedented meeting, the first between an American president and a leader of North Korea, proves that real change is indeed possible. The past does not have to define the future. Yesterday's conflict does not have to be tomorrow's war.
The president will now head back to Washington, D.C. as the first U.S. president to come face-to-face with the leader of North Korea.
Now, we understand Air Force One just took off from Singapore. Meanwhile, somebody else who came face-to-face with the president, Sean Hannity, host of Hannity, he is live in Singapore. And Sean, just before the press conference that the president wrapped up about 45 minutes ago. Good morning to you. Good evening to you there. Before he did the press conference, he sat down with you. When he walked into the room, you've known him for a while. What was your impression, how he felt about what he had accomplished?
It's interesting because the room where I'm in right now is actually the room where they first met, meaning the president and Kim Jong-un. To my left is the dining room where, after their initial meeting, they went in for lunch, and to my right is where the balcony is. Honestly, he walked in. I did see the Secretary of State. I saw John Bolton. I saw the Chief of Staff. All of them, it was obvious this had exceeded all of their expectations. And if you remember, before the president left for the G7, he was saying, okay, we're not signing anything, very unlikely.
Yep.
This is a get-to-know-you session, and in all likelihood, there's going to be 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings, and we'll go at his speed. He wants to go fast, great. He wants to go slow, great. But it was very obvious that everybody felt really good about it, and especially the president mentioned at his press conference, he mentioned in the interview with me that the one thing that he threw in at the end that he was really happy about, and he went into more detail in our interview, was that there are still the remains of Americans, and their families desperately want those remains repatriated back to the United States. So he was very happy with that. I think the biggest takeaway in all of this is that in the lead up to all of this, there were certain conditions, and the president went through this. If Kim Jong-un didn't stop firing missiles over Japan, if he didn't cross the DMZ, if he wasn't willing to talk about denuclearization, if he didn't break down that missile site that he broke down, none of this would have happened. And you know, it's interesting, you watch some of the other media, they're saying, well, the president gave up a lot, and the president gave up nothing. There wasn't a penny paid like Bill Clinton when he made a deal with Kim Jong-un's father. There wasn't cargo planes of cash, $150 billion in cash and other currencies like in the Iranian deal that Obama made. It was clear that there was hope, cautious optimism. I mean, look, this cautious, trust but verify. Everything that led up to this, and I think everything that they have going forward, as Mike Pompeo said, the hard work is now beginning.
Yeah, you're right. Even if they hadn't had the meeting yesterday, if it had been canceled, this country still would have gained from it, Sean. He got those 3 American hostages to come home safely, which was wonderful. I know you talked to him about the denuclearization process. Let's listen to a little bit of that interview, and then we'll get your reaction on the back end.
I just think that we are now going to start the process of denuclearization of North Korea. And I believe that he's going back and will start it virtually immediately. And he's already indicated that. And you look at what he's done. So we got our hostages back, but they've blown up one of their sites, one of their testing sites, their primary testing site. In fact, some people say their only testing site. They're getting rid of a missile, which isn't in the document that was done afterwards. They're getting rid of a missile testing site. They're doing so much now. So it's a process, and it's really moving rapidly.
Sean, that's great. Do you trust him, that Kim Jong-un, that he's going to allow our inspectors to go in and international inspectors to go in and make sure he's actually doing this?
It's a great question, because in many ways I see a lot of parallels between President Trump and Ronald Reagan. President Reagan talked about the evil empire. The world was shocked. The world was talking about and predicting that Ronald Reagan would start World War III or some type of nuclear holocaust. The president, even against his own advisors. Then Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. He walked away from Reykjavik. And then you look at where all of this started, Little Rocket Man, Fire and Fury, and all our button's bigger than yours and ours works better. And when you think of the process and all of the hoops that Kim Jong-un jumped through, and America gave nothing except we got the hostages, as you mentioned. Yep. We got Kim Jong-un crossing the DMZ. Missiles haven't been fired since December. These are all significant things that nobody would have predicted 6 or 7 months ago. And I think it really comes down to a philosophical difference that exists between the left and right, and that is, do you believe in peace through strength, trust but verify, or you believe that somehow the best way to somehow make a deal with a dictator is to bribe them, like Bill Clinton tried to bribe Kim Jong-il's father, or what we know happened in the case of Barack Obama, and we talked about the worst deal probably in the history of mankind, and that's given up $150 billion. There's hope, but there should be caution. There should be caution on the side of everybody. We know that a lot of these regimes lie, but Kim Jong-il, the average monthly salary for a family in North Korea, these families are starving. His regime is at risk because the people have nothing. They are isolated and they're cut off. the pressure from China because of the president's good relationship with the Chinese president, the pressure from Japan, the pressure from the United States, even the world community, it seems to all be coalescing at a good time.
Right.
And the president, to his credit, saw an opportunity and was willing to take a chance. And moving at the speed of Trump, things are very hopeful, I think, a lot more hopeful than they were 48 hours ago.
So, Sean, I noticed the president will not go over the line and talk about maximum pressure. He got a question of what would happen if they back out of this. He goes, I'm not going to get into that. But he was not restrained when he first got the job because President Obama briefed him on how bad the situation was after a certain detonation in 2016. And here's the president telling you about his tough rhetoric and how it led to this moment. Listen.
A lot of people, critics, quickly saying, when you said Little Rocket Man or Fire and Fury or, when he said, oh, I've got a red button on my desk, he said, well, mine's bigger and it works better than yours. How did it evolve from that to this? Because he did say at the very beginning, we're going to basically start over, but that has been building behind the scenes.
Well, I think without the rhetoric, we wouldn't have been here. I really believe that. We did sanctions and all of the things that you would do, but I think without the rhetoric, other administrations, I don't want to get specific on that, but they had a policy of silence. If they said something very bad, very threatening and horrible, just don't answer. That's not the answer. That's not what you have to do. So I think the rhetoric, I hated to do it. Sometimes I felt foolish doing it, but we had no choice.
So Little Rocket Man got him to the table, Sean.
You know what's really amazing about that is, and I had a follow-up question with him on that, and I said, so this was strategic. He said, I even felt a little embarrassed about having to go out there so aggressively. And clearly the president, and I would assume this is part of what the president did in his business life, is that he went right at him. And he went at him hard, and he didn't back down. And I think those things, coupled with the things he was saying, coupled with a show of military force. He was sending Navy striker brigades right off the coast of North Korea, showing a sign of force. Obviously, the sanctions have played a big part in all of this. And I also think that the president's relationship, it's an underreported story, the president's relationship with the president of China has played a big part. And I asked him about that because, remember, when the Chinese president came to the White House or in Mar-a-Lago or wherever they met, they were supposed to have meetings that would only last 15 minutes, and they would go on 4.5 hours. So a real bond and relationship was built there, and it led to a historic moment that I don't think anybody really saw coming. This is really fascinating, and I think what makes this president so far transformative in terms of being unlike any president we have ever seen in our lifetime. The only closest parallel I would see would be Ronald Reagan, because obviously it's peace through strength, it's trust but verify, strong rhetoric is being used. But if you really think about the magnitude and the possibilities here, again, being cautious, nothing is finished until it's done. Once the process, as the president pointed out, once that process of denuclearization begins, you can't go back scientifically. So I think this is going to happen in short order, and I think that the president deserves a lot of credit for being willing to talk to somebody that everybody thought would be a bad idea, but he did it from a position of strength.
Did this just get him reelected, Sean?
Brought us to this point.
Did this just get him reelected, or is this going to help him with the midterms, the Republicans in the midterm?
Ainsley, when you really put it all together, what do you have? You have, okay, the best economy in 500 days. You compare it to the Obama economy, 13 million more Americans on food stamps, 8 million more in poverty, the worst recovery since the 40s, lowest labor participation rate, doubling the revenues. And what do we have now? We have 14 states with record low unemployment, record low unemployment for Hispanic Americans, Black Americans, women in the workforce. Today in America, we have more jobs available than we have people on unemployment. Consumer confidence at a high. So Do I think success for this president economically and what's happening here, do I think that's going to have a big impact on this all-important midterm? Because we know what the Democrats' agenda is absolutely yes. And then I think once the campaign gets started, probably after Labor Day in earnest, you know, the Democrats, what? They want to impeach him. They want to say Russia, Russia, Russia. They have said they want to take back the tax cuts, what Nancy Pelosi called crumbs, which is $2,000 a family. They want open borders, and they want to keep Obamacare. I think that's a pretty strong comparing and contrasting election that I got to believe that probably the Republicans would win. The blue wave seems to be turning into a trickle, if you will.
Well, of course, the president went there for one thing, and that was for them to get North Korea to pull the plug on their nuke program, and he got that assurance. They signed that. They're in that suite of rooms you're in right now in Singapore. You're live at the hotel. Okay, so you were describing the location, but what was it like with Trump and Kim Jong-un? You asked the president, and this is what he said.
In the room alone, and then the subsequent talks with your team and their team. How honest? How brutal? What was said? Try and bring people into the room.
So we got along very well. We got along from the beginning. We started off, he and myself and two interpreters, and from the beginning we got along. You know, I've made the statement, and I've said it before. I've said it about a lot of different kinds of relationships. You can almost tell right at the beginning.
Did you tell at the beginning? What was that first minute?
No, I felt very good at the beginning, and I talked about we have to denuke. This country has to be denuked, and he understood that. He fully understood it. He didn't fight it.
So the president sizes somebody up in 1 minute, and in that first minute, he liked them.
It is, look, I think we all, in a way, have certain gifts in life. And the president, all the years that he's been negotiating deals, he's sizing people up very quickly. And I think right away, and it probably surprises the president a little bit, although there's been a lot of preparation, obviously, leading up to this. The Secretary of State did a phenomenal job. He deserves a lot of credit, as did John Bolton and everybody else. But it really, I think, came down to how well would these two men get along? I mean, there was communication. There was a pullout at one point. Clearly, North Korea, I think, needs this deal a lot more than the United States does, but the world needs it more than he does. Because if you really care, and this is why I think everybody should really be cheering and pulling for the president to be successful here, because if you care about your kids and you care about your grandkids, and you've got a possibility at denuclearization of the entire Korean peninsula, and you're going to stop missiles flying over Japan and the threatening of Guam and even the continental United States. They have nuclear weapons. They get intercontinental ballistic missiles. Then we're talking about reaching either the west coast of the United States, Boston, New York. Now we've got a much bigger problem.
Right.
And the idea that this could be a win-win, that they will have an opportunity to join the world community, an opportunity economically for their children and grandchildren, and a safer world, I just don't see how anybody can argue intelligently that everything we got leading up to this and all the possibilities surrounding this isn't good for everybody.
Right. I think one of the questions was, hey, did he get what he wanted by sitting next to a president of the United States? And he said, well, I just saved, if I could save 30 million lives, I'll go anywhere. The president talked to you, Sean, about what it was like from the very beginning, from when he met the 34-year-old. Listen.
You didn't think coming in here you were going to sign an agreement, and you said maybe it takes 2, 3, 4, 5 meetings. But you were open to going as fast or as slow as he wanted.
We got along better than I would have assumed right from the beginning. We got a lot more done today than I ever thought possible. And he's going back. He's now headed back. And I think he's going back to get this done. He wants to get it done. You hear the whole thing about his father and other administrations or his grandfather. The fact is that he brings that up. But they weren't dealing with me. They were dealing with different people, and they never got very far. Nobody's ever come close to this.
Did he talk about the difference between past administrations and yours?
Yes, but I can't say that because I don't want to be the one saying it. At some point, I'm sure he'll say it.
Yeah.
But they never got it done. And they were never this close either. I mean, it was never to a point where they were like we are.
Times have changed.
Yep. Sean, final thoughts?
Yeah, you know, in many ways, if you really look at, this could be a transformative moment for the entire presidency. And what I mean by that is America consciously did not elect an establishment figure, either a Republican or a Democrat. America elected an iconoclastic disruptor and a guy that works at the speed of normal business people and that wants to get things done. I really can't think of any political figure on the world stage today that would have started this back in March, is sitting here in June and telling us, again, where it all started, Little Rocket Man, Fire and Fury, and telling us that Kim Jong-un is probably going back to North Korea, and he has every belief and confidence that the process of denuclearization is going to begin immediately. That, to me, is transformative. Making decisions faster is transformative. And I think the biggest thing that we're going to learn about the presidency and Donald Trump's success is rooted in a very simple, fundamental, very basic principle that a lot of politicians don't get. If you make promises to the American people and you follow through and you check off your list one by one, that's good politics. You will be rewarded for keeping your word. That's why, as a conservative, I was so disappointed in so many Republicans that said repeal, replace for 7 years, and they didn't have the character to keep that promise. And they didn't even have a plan ready after 7 years, after 20 years of talking about health savings accounts, healthcare cooperatives. So what's transformative is, I think the presidency, the American people will now come to expect their president to move faster, expeditiously, to take risks, to mean what they say, and keep their word.
Sean,
so
real quickly, do
a
you
lot
know?
of hope coming into this.
Do you
we
know
have
if
to be cautious, but certainly there's no downside to what's happened here at all. Only a win on every side, as far as I'm concerned.
Sean, do you know if he asked Kim Jong-un, why did you do what you did to Otto Warmbier?
You know, it's interesting. That's a really good question. He went into detail. I know you guys have had the family on the show. He talked about the family as close friends. And he said, I don't even think this would have happened but for what happened in that particular case.
He said
That
he
to
didn't
me
die
was he also said that he didn't think this would have happened had he not used the rhetoric that he used. Those are pretty interesting insider, strategic. It brings you a little bit into the strategic, tactical mind, I think, of the president.
Sean, we're going to watch you 9 o'clock tonight. I don't know how you're going to do it, but we'll see the whole interview.
No, you're not. You're going to be sleeping, Brian. You're not going to be watching my show.
No way. I'm watching your show. There's going to be a quiz.
You're just saying you're going to be up to be nice.
No, we'll be out. All right, Sean, thank you
guys
very
get up
much.
at, what,
Thanks,
2
Sean.
o'clock in the morning?
Something like that.
I go to sleep when you guys get up.
No, we know. We passed them tonight. All right, a great interview. We'll be watching tonight. Sean Hannity live from
congratulations.
Thanks,
Singapore.
guys. Thanks for having me.
All right, 10 minutes before the bottom of the hour. Here's what we have, a lot. So what happens now that North Korea promises to complete denuclearization? We have a panel here to discuss what's next.
Good morning and welcome back. We will have the very latest on the Singapore summit in just a few moments. But first, some other stories making headlines this morning, starting with a Fox News alert. President Trump's chief economic advisor is recovering from a mild heart attack. Larry Kudlow is in good condition at Walter Reed Medical Center and is expected to make a full recovery. Also breaking right now, 4 children are dead after a day-long standoff with a gunman who shot a cop. Orlando police say Gary Wayne Lindsay also shot and killed himself. He's believed to be the father of 2 of the children. A police officer shot responding to the initial call is recovering. And it's deadline day for the Justice Department. The House Intelligence Committee demanding they hand over documents related to the Russia probe. Committee Chair Devin Nunes says if the DOJ does not comply, it will be considered obstruction of the investigation. Steve.
Thank you, Julia. This is a Fox News alert. Just within the last hour, President Trump making America's message to North Korea very clear.
We are now going to start the process of denuclearization of North Korea, and I believe that he's going back and will start it virtually immediately.
Oh, that sounds good. What happens next? Here with a panel discussion, we've got Hagar Shamali, a former spokesperson for the U.S. mission to the United Nations. Morgan Ortagus, Center Square, is a former State Department press officer. And David Tafuri worked in the State Department under President Obama. Welcome to all of you. Thanks for getting them so early. All right, first question. Can I ask all of you this? On a scale of 1 to 10, how big a deal is this? Hagar.
Oh, I'm going to put it at a 10.
Is it?
Yeah, because, listen, at the end of the day, this is historic regardless of how you look at the deal that came out of this, right? Because you have two leaders. It's the first ever sit-down meeting between the leader of the United States and the leader of North Korea. And regardless, it's positive, even though I do think that there are a lot of missing details. There's a lot to work out, but at the end of the day, it's incredibly significant.
Well, ultimately, they did agree to a complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, which is a big deal. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how big a deal is it?
That's a lot of words to say this morning,
It
Steve.
is, and hard ones.
I mean, I agree with Hagar. It's a 10. I think the difference, what you normally see in the diplomatic process, is you'll have a year of negotiations, for example, leading up to a meeting like this, and then the principals meet at the end. And the president, like he does with many things, has decided to upend that tradition and meet at the beginning. I mean, he's really cutting through layers and layers of diplomacy that normally happens. So this is not a final end product today. This is a commitment by two leaders, and I think that the president is right to try something new. What we've really done over the past 20 and 30 years is have done negotiations here or there. We've tried to ignore North Korea in many ways because we've been focused on Iraq or Afghanistan. We can't ignore it anymore. It's a nuclear state. You have to try something new. You have to try something unprecedented.
All right, we've got 2 10s so far, David. On a scale of 1 to 10, how big a deal is this?
I'm going to give this a 7 or 8.
Okay, not a shocker.
President Trump handled this very well. He did a long press conference. He answered a lot of questions. It was astounding to watch. Unfortunately, most of America missed it because it happened so early here in America. But the bottom line is they signed an agreement with just broad details, and they agreed to denuclearize. But that agreement was already reached with the president of South Korea. So we need to see more details on what's going to happen, actually. And, of course, this is still, Kim Jong-un is still a ruthless dictator. You can't put lipstick on a pig. He hasn't made any real changes yet. So we need to see actual results and change before we can be really excited.
And you know, Hagar, one of the reasons we probably will, and the president said they're going to go and he's going to start dismantling things right away when he goes back to North Korea, is because the sanctions are going to stay in place until their program is just toast.
Right, absolutely. And in fact, first of all, I know that, and Morgan and I can both attest, having worked at the Treasury Department, that Treasury is probably prepared with extra targets to roll out in a moment's notice or extra sanctions policies in the event that things don't go as planned, right? And that North Korea pursues deceptive behavior, which they very well might. But the fact of the matter is, back in 2007, during the six-party talks, the point about sanctions was it was a sticking point with the North Koreans. It was important to them. They wanted to see sanctions lifted. So that's a really big selling point. It's a very big bargaining chip we have.
Morgan?
Yeah, I think what we need to see happen now is that we should see bipartisan consensus of supporting the president and his team going forward. I think that the president is very smart to have Mike Pompeo continue to lead these negotiations. He clearly is the closest to the North Koreans in terms of having met with them while he was CIA director. And I think Pompeo has shown to be an incredibly tough and skilled negotiator. There's still, as David said, there's still a lot of devil in the details. But this, Steve, is the challenge of our generation. The three of us here are foreign policy nerds. We've all worked in government together. We all worked in Iraq, Afghanistan. But dealing with Asia, the pivot to Asia that President Obama talked about is now happening in this administration. Dealing with China, dealing with North Korea. This is my generation's challenge. And so I'm encouraged that we're making progress today. Still a lot to go.
And David, the tough thing is to make sure that this time they don't cheat like they did the last couple of times.
That's right.
So ultimately, how do you figure out a way to verify that they're not cheating?
Well, that's part of the details that need to be worked out. So there needs to be
I understand.
inspectors.
Work it out right now.
Yeah.
How would you do it?
Look, President Trump was right to acknowledge in his answers to the questions today that there's a long horizon for true denuclearization. It's going to take 10 to 15 years. So one of the problems
I
is
don't
that...
get why it takes so long.
Well, because if you look at a map and you look at North Korea, there are missile and nuclear sites all over the country, right? And so you have to go into each of those sites. You have to, first of all, disarm the nuclear weapons he has now. You have to stop the production of uranium. And then you have to take out all of the equipment, right? And you have to have inspectors to do all of that in a country that's very close.
Trump is not going to wait 15 years.
I don't think he's going to wait. And also, Kim Jong-un does not want to wait 15 years because he wants return on this right away. He needs the relief right away. So that's one of the problems. He's not going to be patient about this, but we need to be patient and phase in sanctions relief.
All right. Great discussion this morning, David and Morgan and Hagar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Terrific. All right. Meanwhile, most of the attention is on denuking, but there is another part of President Trump's agreement that is important to many American families. Listen.
I must have had just countless calls and letters. They want the remains of their sons back. I asked for it today, and we got it. The remains will be coming back.
That is big. Ed Henry says this is a very big deal. He's going to join us live from Singapore with details. You're watching a special edition of Fox and Friends.
Yesterday's conflict does not have to be tomorrow's war. And as history has proven over and over again, adversaries can indeed become friends. We can honor the sacrifice of our forefathers by replacing the horrors of battle with the blessings of peace. And that's what we're doing, and that's what we have done.
And those are the scripted comments from the president, but then he went and took an hour of unscripted questions after going 5 hours with negotiating with North Korea. Prior to that, flying 21 hours in the plane. So he's been up for quite a while, as is Ed Henry, Fox News' chief national correspondent, anchoring a lot through the night for us and through the morning. Ed, it seemed to us that the president was quite pleased at what took place. What's the mood on the ground?
Mood on the ground among White House staff is pretty jubilant because I got to say, if you followed our coverage step by step overnight, the president was hearing about some of the coverage back in the United States, 12 time zones away. And if you listen to some other channels, they were saying that this whole thing was falling apart. Why? Because of one little detail that in the end did not matter one whit, which is that Kim Jong-un told the White House staff that he wanted to leave this afternoon, just a few hours after they first started meeting. The president, who originally said he was going to fly Air Force One back tomorrow, said, okay, I'm going to fly back today as well. That set off this frenzy of media claims that, oh, this is falling apart, they're going home early, there's not going to be any victory here. And instead, it was just the idea that the president believed all along that within a few hours space, they had already done a lot of the groundwork before they ever met behind closed doors. And he knew he could get the deal done, and he got it done. And yet there are still critics out there saying, oh, this is no big deal. You're seeing Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer saying absolutely nothing in terms of statements and social media. And I'm fascinated. If you look at the New York Times Twitter feed, about 14, 16 hours ago, they had a story up there saying that they're still miles apart, the U.S. and North Korea, and their international editor sent out a tweet saying something to the effect of, a few hours ago, Kim Jong-un has already won a lot. What are you talking about? Kim Jong-un has won? It's a polar opposite.
Yeah, Ed, when we were all going to bed, and many of our viewers were going to bed, we knew the meeting was last night at 9 o'clock Eastern time, and we expected to have some sort of a press conference at some point, and I actually went to bed with the TV on. I was watching your coverage and just waking up periodically because I wanted to keep up with it. And about 1:30, I happened to wake up and I'm watching the screen, and then you see that table where they signed the document, and we see a man come out with white gloves, and he puts a pen in front of each of the two chairs, and then they come out together and they sign this document. Did you guys get a heads up about that? Was that a shock to you?
Yeah, what happened was shortly before that, again, as you say, all this happening in the middle of the night in the United States, and we're trying to follow every tea leaf that might tell us something. After their working lunch, I believe, President Trump just came out and said, we're going to sign something. we're going to sign something. He didn't say what, a document, a peace deal, an agreement. And so that sent us off on a frenzy because we were starting a live broadcast and we're trying to figure out what are they going to sign. They went behind closed doors, talked about it, and then as you say, Ainsley, you're exactly right. They put out 2 chairs, 2 pens, a North Korean official with white gloves laying it all out very carefully, and then they had U.S. and North Korean flags. Again, critics are saying, why is a U.S. flag next to the North Korean flag? Well, do you want to bury your head in the sand and say that we're never, ever going to talk for another 60 or 70 years? Here's another little nugget, by the way, you might have missed while you were sleeping, which is that our cameras and our audio mics at one point picked up Kim Jong-un's interpreter saying that Kim told President Trump something to the effect of, many people in the world will think of this as a form of fantasy from a science fiction movie. And I found that particularly fascinating because it's the kind of thing we're thinking about on the outside, this 34-year-old dictator with an almost 72-year-old president. I think his birthday's Thursday. Generations apart. It almost is like a science fiction movie. Just 2 weeks ago, this summit wasn't happening. It had been called off. And now it all came together.
Yeah, and, you know, of this, clearly it was a made-for-television event, the way things were staged, where Kim's car came up and then Trump's limousine was there 5 minutes later, and we saw them shake hands, and they went over. There was a TV in the camera in the other room, and then they broke off, and then they came out, they signed something. What would you say were there any unscripted, awkward moments? Because from what we saw, it seemed like it all went off without a hitch.
One negative, one positive. One awkward moment I did see, there's a video online where the president told a little joke about getting ready for one of the many photo ops they had, and he said to the photographers, make sure you get a good angle, make us look skinny and really good. And then and he laughed, and then they panned the camera to Kim Jong-un, and he looked like, like, I don't get the joke. You know, it's a funny video if you search for it on Twitter. But here's the bottom line.
Before we take a picture, don't we?
And another, yeah, we want to look skinny. But the other funny thing that worked was, while they were maybe, you know, going back and forth, at some point the president said, have you seen my limousine? And we got this wonderful video of the president bringing Kim Jong-un out to see what we call in the United States the Beast, that massive General Motors vehicle that the president goes around, bulletproof and all the rest. And you saw Kim Jong-un almost like a kid in a candy store. Wow, look at this limo. Look at those tires. You got to wonder if the president was working it. Was the president working him a little?
Well, that's a little
idea,
personal.
Look at the toys I have. Hey, you want to open up your economy? Maybe you'll get a car like this.
And he did get a video so he can image what it would be like if North Korea opened up to a market economy.
Here's the video.
In fact, here's the moment when the president said, hey, do you want to go see my car? And
they opened an 800-pound door.
The Beast.
Yeah, we don't show too much.
Well,
no, that's what I was thinking too, Brian.
So,
but I want to talk about
what for the president. But I got to say something. Yeah.
I want to go over the things
where he slipped up. At the news conference, he was talking about this wonderful video and how they took out the iPad. And at one point, the president said, you know, we had this thing on cassette. And I was saying, was there an 8-track in there, Mr. President? A cassette? Anyway.
Hey, here are the 4 things. Let's take a look together. If people are just waking up or weren't able to stay up last night, the 4 things that were included in the document that they signed. Establish a new relations. Let's start anew. Forget about the past. Build a stable, peaceful regime on the peninsula. Number 3 is reaffirming the April 27, 2018 declaration that North Korea commits to work towards, this is key, complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, recovering POW MIA remains, including the immediate repatriation of those already identified. And here's the thing, Ed. A lot of people are saying, what about irrevocable, verifiable, irrevocable elimination of your nuclear program? That wasn't in these documents. He says that's to come.
Yes, and the devil, as I've heard you've been saying, will be in the details, and that's true. And we need to be skeptical. This is not a clear victory. The president had a very good day, but he's going to have to follow up, and so is Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. But let me tell you something else that happened here yesterday that might have gotten lost in all of the breaking news and big developments. Mike Pompeo, who's played a pivotal role here, of course, had that one secret meeting over Easter weekend that got all this go. Bottom line is, he said, Until we have that clear path to denuclearization, we are not taking the boot off the throat. We're not going easy on the U.S. sanctions. And in fact, Secretary Pompeo told reporters here in Singapore, we have more sanctions that we can roll out. Right. So maybe it's just a threat, but they are not letting the boot off the throat. And by the way, that POW MIA issue is important. It's not just a throwaway. The president says he got that as a late concession. There are thousands of our fellow Americans who never learned what happened to their loved ones in the Korean War, and the president says they're going to get those remains. That is a big deal.
It is. All right, Ed Henry joining us from Singapore, where he looks handsome and thin at 6:43 in the evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eddie.
Thanks, Ed.
All right, still ahead on this historic Tuesday, Anthony Scaramucci is going to be joining us live, Dinesh D'Souza, and Ben Shapiro, all live.
And the president hailing the document he signed with Kim Jong-un, committing to complete denuclearization. But does it hold up legally? Judge Napolitano is here, and that's his headshot.
Good morning to you. We will get back to the latest on the Singapore summit in just a few moments. But first, some other stories making headlines. Accused leaker James Wolf expected in federal court today. The former Senate intelligence staffer will be charged with lying to investigators about meetings with reporters. He turned himself into the FBI as part of an ongoing investigation into government leaks. Also happening today, millions heading to the polls for primaries in 5 states. This will be Maine's first election using a ranked choice voting system. It'll take about a week to determine the outcome. And the city of Seattle voting today on the controversial head tax less than a month after passing it. It requires large companies to contribute $275 per employee every year to raise money for homeless services. Companies like Amazon and Starbucks oppose the tax. Ainsley?
Hey, thanks so much, Jillian. President Trump signing his name next to Kim Jong-un's name in that comprehensive document right there following the historic summit.
But without Congress involved, how much significance does it hold? Is it legal? Let's talk to Fox News senior judicial analyst Andrew Napolitano. Okay, so the two world leaders signed it,
right?
But is it legally binding?
It is. No, it's not. It's what we call an executive agreement. So Kim Jong-un, or the people that he answers to, whose names we don't know and may never know, could abrogate it, and President Trump could. Think of this as the Iran deal that John Kerry negotiated for President Obama, which President Trump decided is grossly unfair, is harmful to the U.S., is harmful to Israel.
Well, it's not a treaty.
Right, because it's not a treaty. What is a treaty? A treaty is an agreement like this, which is sent to the Senate and ratified by 2/3 of the Senate. Once that happens, the treaty is the law of the land, and everybody is bound by it. Until that happens, it's just an agreement between two human beings. But often treaties begin with these executive agreements. You know, so the president himself said it's a long journey, and this is the first couple of steps.
Congress will see this and will either pass it or not.
I doubt it. I don't
Really?
think the president is going to submit it to Congress until he has something more final and more complete, and that depends on Secretary Pompeo and our former colleague, Ambassador Bolton.
Right. It's clearly just the beginning. And one thing, Ambassador Chris Hill, who tried to do this deal a while ago and failed, he just said that there needs to be an action document along with this. And one thing they said they drafted in haste, they didn't put the word verified in there. That would have helped.
You know, it also would have helped if they had agreed to end the Korean War. But again, you can't
get separate.
Right. You can't get everything. You can't get everything all at once. We were talking during the break. I could not agree with Sean Hannity more. Donald Trump looked more presidential this morning than I've ever seen him look. This may very well be transformative for him as a person and for the office that he occupies.
He's so controlled. It shows you he can do whatever he wants. He doesn't use action language that would have blown up this deal at any point over the last month.
Right.
Even his letter was mentioned.
You also, I forget where I was, if I was in the car, I heard you about an hour ago, characterizing this as, this is the way business people operate. They don't have the patience of politicians.
Right.
They want things done, and they want it done in a short period of time. But I think he understands that this is nowhere near the final agreement. Whatever goes to Congress, if at all, and it's up to the president, he doesn't have to send it to Congress. And it's not Congress, it's just the Senate. Sure. If he doesn't send it to the Senate, he exposes it to whatever his successor, whoever that person may be, in 2 years or in 6 years, may want to do to it. But whatever goes to the Senate will be more comprehensive and will have the action aspect to it in it as well.
This is just the beginning.
That's why he's on retainer. All right, Judge, thank you very much.
Judge.
All the best, guys.
All right.
Well, as the world reacts to the historic summit, our next guest calls this the third great diplomatic thaw in our lifetime. Dinesh D'Souza.
President Trump wrapping up in Singapore after signing his name next to Kim Jong-un's in an historic summit that our next guest is calling the third great diplomatic thaw in our lifetime. Here to weigh in, conservative filmmaker with the new movie Death of a Nation, out August 3rd, Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh, good morning to you.
Good morning.
What do you mean third great thaw in our lifetime?
Well, we see in our living memory that history sometimes offers these openings for leaders who are able to seize them. We saw it in the 90s with South Africa, an apartheid regime that absolutely collapsed, disappeared almost overnight. We saw it with Reagan and Gorbachev. Seeing Trump and Kim reminded me of that. The historic opening with the Soviet Union, the relationship between Reagan and Gorbachev, initially an intermediate nuclear forces agreement, but eventually something much more spectacular, the collapse of the Soviet system and regime itself. It takes an element of luck to present these historical opportunities, but it also takes leadership to step to the front and know what to do with them.
Sure.
And what a stunning contrast between Obama's so-called leading from behind and the way that Trump kind of jumps into the forefront, takes things by the horns, and in a sense bends them to his will.
And in fact, Dinesh, the president told Sean Hannity in an interview we ran about 45 minutes ago that it was a tough rhetoric, referring to him as Little Rocket Man and fire and fury that got him to the table. So that, because he's a disruptor and he doesn't do things the way normal politicians do, that's what got him to the table.
Well, if we think back again to Reagan, it's the same thing. Reagan began with a massive military buildup, announced a strategic defense initiative, all aimed in a sense at provoking the Soviet Union and inviting it into an arms race that he believed they couldn't win. And in the second term, Reagan, in a sense, pivoted and developed this incredible relationship with Gorbachev. I still remember I was moved to tears at Reagan's funeral. Gorbachev kissed the casket.
Right.
So this kind of thing can happen. It's rare, but it can happen, and we should be open to it.
No doubt it is historic. What happens next? Stay tuned. Dinesh D'Souza joining us today from Texas. Sir, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Still ahead on our telecast, we've got Sebastian Gorka. We've got